The Galactic Council had a rule for every new world that joined its ranks. Every planet was given a rank. A number. A place in the long list of worlds that mattered and worlds that did not. The rank was based on many things: the strength of a planet's military, the power of its technology, the size of its population, and the speed of its ships. Earth was ranked last. Not second to last. Not somewhere in the middle. Last. At the very bottom of a list that held over 400 planets. The council officials who filed the report did not even argue about it. They simply looked at the data, looked at each other, and wrote the number down without a second thought. One official had said, during the review meeting, that Earth was, and these were his exact words, a curiosity, nothing more. The others had nodded. Some had not even looked up from their papers. That was the day Alan got the letter. He was sitting at his kitchen table when it arrived. A plain man in his early 40s, with short brown hair going gray at the sides and a habit of drinking his tea before it cooled. He worked for the Earth Foreign Office, a small department that most people in the government had forgotten existed. His job, for the past 11 years, had been to study the Galactic Council, its rules, its members, its history. He had read every report. He had learned 4 alien languages on his own time, using borrowed recordings and old printed guides. When the letter told him he had been chosen as Earth's first official ambassador to the Galactic Council, he read it twice. Then he finished his tea. Then he read it a third time. He told his neighbor, an old woman named Pat who kept chickens in her back garden, before he told anyone at the office. Pat had looked at him over the fence and said, "Well, don't let them push you around." Then she went back to feeding her chickens. Alan thought about that for a long time on the journey to the council station. The council station was enormous. It sat in orbit above a pale blue gas giant in the Varren system, a structure so large that Alan's small transport ship looked like a speck of dust floating beside it. He pressed his face close to the window like a child and looked at it for a long time. Inside, the station was even more impressive. Wide halls of pale stone. Ceilings that stretched so high they disappeared into shadow. Delegates from hundreds of worlds moving in every direction, dressed in robes and armor and materials Alan had no name for. Some of them had 4 arms. Some had no eyes that Alan could see. One group moved in a slow, rolling way that suggested their bones worked very differently from his. None of them looked at him. A junior council aide, a thin creature with silver skin and 3 fingers on each hand, met Alan at the arrival gate. The aide did not introduce itself. It simply handed Alan a small card with a room number on it and walked away. Alan found his seat in the council chamber on his own. It was in the far corner. Row 47. Tucked behind a wide stone pillar so large that Alan had to lean sideways just to see the main floor. The seat itself was slightly too small for a human body, and the desk in front of it wobbled when he rested his arm on it. He set up his small recorder, arranged his notes, and sat quietly. The meeting began without any introduction of the new Earth delegate. No name was called. No acknowledgement was given. The senior council members spoke rapidly in the common galactic tongue about trade routes and border disputes and a mining conflict near the Dellan Belt. Alan followed most of it. He had studied hard. At one point, a large delegate from the Morvi system, a species known for their heavy gray bodies and very loud voices, turned and looked directly at Alan's corner. Alan sat up straight, thinking the delegate was about to speak to him. The delegate looked straight through him, turned back to the floor, and continued speaking. Alan wrote in his notes, "They do not see us yet. That is fine. We are patient people." He underlined it once. Then he went back to listening. Far away, on the other side of the galaxy, on a planet that the council had ranked last on a list of 400, a woman named Rosa was outside in the dark. She farmed a small piece of land in the flat countryside, the kind of place where the sky at night was very wide and very clear. She grew vegetables mostly. kept a few animals, fixed her own fences and her own roof and her own tractor when it broke down, which it did often. Rosa was not a scientist. She had no interest in politics. She had never heard the name Galactic Council and would not have cared much if she had. What she cared about was the soil, the weather, and the long, quiet evenings after a full day of work. But she loved the stars. Every clear night, when the work was done and the animals were settled, she would pull an old wooden chair out to the edge of the field and sit. She would wrap a blanket around her shoulders and look up. She had done this since she was a girl. Her grandfather had done it before her. He used to say that the sky was the one thing nobody could fence off or take away. She did not know, sitting there in her chair on that particular night, that a small transport ship carrying one quiet, careful man was docking at a station she had never heard of. She did not know that somewhere beyond the stars she was watching, an enemy force was beginning to move through the dark between worlds. Slowly at first. Quietly. The way a fire starts before anyone smells the smoke. She did not know any of it. She just sat and looked up, the way she always did, and found the whole sky beautiful. A dog barked somewhere down the road. An animal shifted in the barn. The wind moved through the tall grass at the edge of the field with a low, soft sound. Rosa pulled her blanket a little tighter and stayed until the cold drove her inside. She would be up before sunrise. There was always work to do. The galaxy did not know her name. It did not know her planet's name, not really. Not in any way that mattered to its great councils and its long lists and its careful rankings. But the galaxy was going to learn. It just did not know that yet. The first sign that something was wrong came from a place called Outer Reach 7. It was a small monitoring station. Just a box of metal and wire floating at the very edge of explored space, staffed by a rotating crew of 12 from various council worlds. Their job was simple. Watch the dark. Record anything unusual. Send reports every 3 days. The report stopped. No warning. No final message. No distress call. Just silence where there had always been a signal. The Council's communication office logged it as a possible equipment failure and sent a note to the Maintenance Division. The Maintenance Division added it to a list. The list sat on a desk. Nobody moved quickly. That was the first mistake. Glenn was 26 years old and had been stationed at Earth's small deep space listening post for 8 months. It was not a glamorous posting. The post was a converted satellite platform, cramped and cold, staffed by a crew of 9. Their equipment was old. Their budget was small. The Council had never offered Earth access to the main communication grid, so Earth had built its own, slower, simpler, but functional. Glenn had joined the Earth Space Monitoring Corps because he was good with signals. He could hear patterns in noise the way some people heard melody in music. His supervisor, a broad-shouldered woman named Kay, had once told him he had the best ears in the division. He had laughed it off. But he took his work seriously. He was on a night shift when the signal came in. It was not a clean signal. It was broken. Scattered across 3 frequencies at once, the way a transmission sounded when it was sent in a hurry, or sent by someone who did not have time to be careful. Glenn sat forward in his chair and put his headset on properly. He listened. It was in the common galactic tongue, which Glenn had been studying for 2 years from recorded lessons. His understanding was not perfect. But enough. He caught words. Short, hard words pushed together too fast. He caught a location marker, outer Varen belt, deep range. He caught a number. A fleet number. And then a single word, repeated 4 times before the signal broke apart completely. The word was gone. Glenn sat very still for a moment. Then he pulled off his headset, stood up, and walked directly to Kay's office. He knocked once and opened the door without waiting. Kay looked up from her paperwork. She read his face before he said a word. "Sit down," she said. "Tell me everything." He told her. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she asked him to play the signal again. She listened a second time with her eyes closed. Then she opened her eyes, picked up her communication unit, and began making calls. Glenn went back to his station. He kept listening. What had happened in the outer Varen belt was not an equipment failure. The Varek had arrived. Nobody in the council knew exactly where they came from. The oldest records mentioned them in passing, a force from beyond the mapped regions, encountered once, long ago, by a civilization that no longer existed. Most council historians had filed them under legend. A story told by species who needed something to be afraid of. The Varek were not a legend. They moved in a formation that covered a huge area of space, hundreds of ships spread across a distance that took days to cross even at full speed. Their ships were dark. They did not broadcast signals. They did not send warnings. They simply arrived at the edge of a system, paused for a short time as if studying it, and then moved in. What they left behind was nothing. Not ruins. Not wreckage. Just empty space where there had been stations and ships and living things. The first council world to fall was a mining planet called Dresh, home to about 900,000 people. A council patrol ship reached the system 4 days after contact was lost. The pilot sent a single message back to the council before turning around. The message said, "There is nothing here. I do not mean the colony is destroyed. I mean there is nothing. The planet looks untouched. But there is no one. No signal. No body. Nothing." The council received this message on a Tuesday morning, by Earth's calendar. By Thursday, 2 more systems had gone silent. The panic did not arrive all at once. It crept in, the way cold air moves under a door. First there were quiet meetings behind closed doors. Then there were louder meetings with more people. Then there were emergency sessions of the full council, called in the middle of the night, with delegates still pulling on their robes as they took their seats. The great alien generals stood at the council floor and spoke with confidence. They had large fleets. Fast ships. Weapons that could crack a moon. They used long, impressive words and drew large diagrams on the display screens. Other delegates nodded and felt better. Then the fleets went out to meet the Varek. And the fleets came back, what was left of them, broken and quiet, with generals who no longer used impressive words. Some of the generals did not come back at all. A Morvi fleet admiral named Breck, who had fought in 7 border wars and never retreated from anything, returned from the front with half his ships gone and stood before the council with his great grey hands at his sides. He was asked what the Varek's weakness was. He looked at the floor for a long moment. Then he said, "I do not know. I do not think I found one." The council chamber was very quiet after that. Back at Earth's listening post, Glenn had not slept in 31 hours. He had been tracking the signal patterns, mapping the movement, logging everything he could catch from the edges of the council's communications. The picture that was forming was not a good one. He could see it clearly, the Varek were not moving randomly. They were moving inward. Toward the center of council space. Slow, steady, and completely unstoppable so far. He wrote it all up in a clean report. Facts only. No extra words. Just what the signals showed and what the pattern suggested. He walked it to Kay's office and set it on her desk. She read it without speaking. When she finished, she looked up at him. "You understand what this means," she said. "Yes," Glenn said. "I'm sending this to the Foreign Office," she said. "And to the ambassador." Glenn nodded. He thought about the council station far away. He thought about the long list of ranked planets, and Earth sitting at the very bottom of it. He went back to his station. He kept listening. The storm was coming. It was not rushing. It did not need to rush. It was simply moving, the way a tide moves, steady and enormous and not caring at all what stood in its way. But Glenn was writing everything down. And somewhere in the council station, in a corner seat behind a wide stone pillar, Alan had just received a message from Earth. Alan read Glenn's report 3 times. He sat alone in his small quarters on the council station, a cup of cold tea on the desk beside him, the report printed on paper because he trusted paper more than screens. He had a habit of underlining things that mattered. By the time he finished the 3rd read, there were lines under almost every sentence. He sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a long time. Then he got up, put on his jacket, and went to find the session schedule for the following morning. The emergency session was already the 4th one that week. The council chamber was full in a way Alan had never seen before. Every seat taken. Every delegate present. Even species that rarely attended in person had sent their senior representatives. The air in the room felt tight, the way air feels before a storm breaks. Alan walked to his corner seat in row 47. He set his notes on the wobbly desk. He straightened his jacket. He waited. The session opened with a report from the council's chief military advisor, a tall creature from the Selvian system with 6 arms and a reputation for never showing fear. The advisor showed maps on the great display screen at the front of the chamber. The maps showed the Varek's movement in red. The red covered a lot of space. More than it had covered 3 days ago. More than it had covered the day before that. The advisor spoke carefully. Professionally. But the words, when stripped of their careful professional wrapping, said one simple thing. We are losing. The chamber broke into noise after that. Delegates speaking over each other. Some standing. Some waving documents. A delegate from the Foran system, a species known for being very calm, was visibly trembling. The council chair, an old creature named Ven who had led the chamber for 30 years, struck the floor 3 times with his staff to call for order. Order came slowly. One by one, the great powers of the council spoke. The Morvi promised to rebuild their fleet but needed time. The Selvians offered their second defensive line but warned it would not hold long. The Delan Combine said they were already evacuating their outer colonies. Each speech was followed by a moment of heavy silence, and then the next delegate stood up. Nobody had a real answer. Nobody had a plan that went beyond holding on and hoping. Alan sat in his corner and listened to all of it. He took notes in his small, neat handwriting. He did not fidget. He did not look worried. A junior aide from the Foran delegation who happened to glance toward row 47 noticed the human sitting very still behind the pillar, writing calmly, and thought it was strange. When the last of the major powers had finished speaking, the council chair asked if there were any further contributions before the session moved to a closed vote on emergency defense measures. There was a pause. Alan stood up. Nobody noticed at first. He was behind the pillar, in the corner, in row 47. He had to step out to the side to be visible. He raised his hand in the human manner, which was not a recognized gesture in council proceedings, but the chair saw the movement and squinted toward that corner of the room. The delegate from Earth, the chair said, in a tone that suggested mild surprise that Earth had a delegate at all. A few heads turned. Then a few more. The chamber did not go quiet. If anything, there was a small ripple of noise, a low sound that Alan had heard before in recordings of council sessions, and which he knew meant something close to amusement. He walked to the delegate's speaking floor anyway. He stood at the podium built for creatures taller than him, adjusted the speaking piece downward, and looked out at the chamber. 400 planets worth of eyes looked back at him. Some with curiosity. Some with that same quiet amusement. Some not looking at all. He spoke clearly and without rushing. My name is Alan. I represent Earth. We are ranked last on your list of member worlds. I know that. I am not here to argue about the list. He paused. I am here to tell you that Earth is ready to help. Fully. Without conditions. The amusement sound came back, louder this time. A delegate near the front, a broad, armored figure from the Keth system, made a noise that translated roughly as a laugh. Others joined it. Not cruel, exactly. More like the sound a room makes when something unexpected and slightly absurd has happened. Alan did not move. He did not look down. He did not smile or frown or shift his weight. He just stood there and looked at the chamber with a calm, level expression, and waited for the noise to stop. It took longer to stop than it should have. But it did stop. Because something about the way he was standing was not what they expected. He was not embarrassed. He was not angry. He was not performing bravery the way a young soldier performs it, with a straight back and a loud voice. He was simply calm. Completely, quietly, thoroughly calm. The kind of calm that does not come from having nothing to lose. The kind that comes from having already decided something, long before walking into the room. The Foran delegate who had noticed him earlier leaned toward a colleague and said, very quietly, "Look at his face." The colleague looked. And went quiet. One by one, across the chamber, the noise faded. Alan spoke again. We are not the biggest power in this room. We do not have the largest fleet. We know this. But we have been watching the Varek's movement since the first signals came in. We have been studying the pattern. And we believe we understand something about how they move that your current strategies have not yet used. He set his notes on the podium. Earth asks for a seat at the planning table. Not the head of the table. Any seat. We will show you what we mean from there. He gathered his papers, stepped back from the podium, and walked back to row 47. The chamber was quiet for a long moment. Then the council chair asked for the vote to begin. On Earth, in a plain office building in a city where it was early morning and raining, a woman named Ida had not gone home the night before. She was a general. Not a famous one. Not the kind whose name appeared in news reports or whose face was on anything. She was the kind of general who was very good at her work and very uninterested in being known for it. Her desk was covered in maps, real printed maps, covered in pencil marks and small notes in the margins. She had been working through the night. She had received Glenn's full signal report, Alan's preliminary message from the station, and every piece of public data the council had released about the Varek's movement. She had laid it all out and looked at it the way she looked at every problem. Simply. Directly. Without panic. The Varek moved in a specific pattern. She could see it. They were fast but they were not unpredictable. They hit hard but they did not adapt quickly. They had never faced an opponent who did not fight the way every other opponent had fought them. Ida picked up her pencil and began drawing a new line on the map. She did not know yet that Alan had just stood up in the council chamber. She did not know the vote was happening. She did not know any of that. She just knew there was a problem, and she was already working on the answer. Outside the window, the rain came down steady and quiet over the city. Ida kept drawing. The council gave Ida 3 days to present her plan. She presented it in 2. She stood at the front of the war room, a long, low chamber deep inside the council station, filled with military advisors from a dozen worlds, and she put her maps on the table. Not digital maps. Not the glowing, spinning displays the other generals used. Just printed paper maps with pencil marks on them. There was a moment of silence when the other generals saw them. One of the Morvi advisors leaned toward another and said something quietly. The other one shrugged. They were polite enough not to laugh out loud. Ida did not notice, or did not care. She began talking. She talked for 40 minutes without stopping. She explained what she had seen in the Varek's movement pattern. She showed how the Varek always struck the strongest point of a defense first, always. Every time. Without fail. They had never fought an enemy who let them hit the strong point and held back somewhere else. They had never faced a trap, because every opponent they had ever met had tried to fight them the same way. Head on. With everything. She explained what would happen if the joint fleet did not fight that way. The room was quiet when she finished. The Selvian commander, a veteran who had been in more battles than anyone else at the table, looked at the paper maps for a long time. Then he looked at Ida. "You are asking us to pull back on purpose," he said. "Yes," Ida said. "And you are certain this works?" Ida looked at him steadily. "I am certain it is the only thing that has not been tried." The Selvian commander looked at the maps again. Then he picked up a pencil, a very strange thing for an alien general to do, and pointed at a position on the map. "Here," he said. "This is where we anchor the second line." Ida nodded. "That is exactly where I was going to suggest." The planning began in earnest after that. The joint fleet that moved out 3 weeks later was unlike anything the galaxy had assembled before. It was not the biggest fleet ever sent to war. The Morvi alone had launched larger forces in old border conflicts. But it was put together differently. Human ships were spread through the formation not as a separate group but woven in among the others, placed at specific points that Ida had chosen carefully. Her own command ship sat not at the front, where commanders traditionally placed themselves, but near the middle, close enough to every part of the fleet to reach them quickly, far enough from the front to see the whole picture clearly. The Varek came in the way they always came. Fast, wide, covering a huge area, striking directly at the strongest visible point of the defense. They hit it hard. And the strong point bent. It pulled back. The Varek pushed forward, deeper than they had pushed against any opponent, sensing a collapse, moving faster to finish it quickly. They moved directly into the space Ida had left open for them. The second line closed. It did not close all at once. It closed in pieces, the way a hand closes around something slowly, from all sides at once. The Varek formation, which had never needed to think about what was behind it, suddenly had things behind it. And beside it. And above and below, in the three-dimensional space of battle where there was no ground to stand on and no single direction that was safe. For the first time, the Varek slowed down. In her command ship, Ida watched the display and said nothing for a long time. Then she said, quietly, to no one in particular, "There it is." She picked up the communication line and began giving the next set of orders. On the ground level of a damaged council supply station near the front line, a woman named Dot was already working. She was not a soldier. She was a nurse. She had come with the human medical unit, a group of 43 men and women who had set up a field station inside the damaged station's lower deck. The ceiling leaked. The lights flickered every few minutes. The floor was cold metal. Dot did not complain about any of it. She had been a nurse for 12 years. She had worked in difficult places before. She set up her equipment, arranged her supplies in the order she would need them, and got to work. The wounded began arriving almost immediately. Some were human. Most were not. Alien soldiers from 6 different species came through the doors of the field station, some walking, some carried, some in conditions that Dot had never seen before and had to figure out quickly with no training and no guide. She asked questions. She observed. She moved fast and thought faster. At one point, a Morvi soldier was brought in who was too large for any of the human medical equipment. Dot looked at him for exactly 3 seconds. Then she started pulling supply crates together to build something big enough to work on. A human medic named Roy held the pieces steady while she worked. They did not talk much. They did not need to. The Morvi soldier survived. Later, when the fighting near the station grew close enough that the sounds of it were clearly audible, someone told Dot to stay inside and below the upper deck. She nodded, finished what she was doing, and then went upstairs when she heard that a group of wounded Selvian soldiers were pinned down in the open ground between two damaged structures. The open ground was not safe. Everyone knew it was not safe. Dot knew it too. She went anyway. She ran low and fast across the open space with a medical bag on her back, reached the first soldier, checked him quickly, and began pulling him back toward cover. She went out 4 times. Roy came with her on the 3rd and 4th. Nobody ordered them to do it. Nobody stopped them either. When they got back inside after the 4th trip, Dot sat down on the floor against the wall, breathed for a moment, then stood up and went back to work. One of the Selvian soldiers she had pulled and looked at her from across the room for a long time. He did not speak her language. She did not speak his. But when their eyes met, he put his hand flat against his chest, a Selvian gesture that his people used for something that translated, roughly, as "I will not forget this." Dot gave him a small nod and moved on to the next patient. Far along the supply line, Glenn was having a much harder 3 days. His unit had been assigned to hold a critical supply corridor, a route that fed power and materials to 3 sections of the front line. If it fell, those sections would lose everything within hours. The Varek hit the corridor on the first day. Glenn's unit held. They hit it again on the second day, harder. Glenn's unit held. By the 3rd day, 2 of their 4 power systems were gone, the corridor was on fire at both ends, and Glenn's unit was down to 11 people from an original 18. Glenn himself had a burn on his left arm that he had wrapped with material torn from his jacket and not looked at since. He moved up and down the line constantly, checking on his people, redistributing supplies, watching the signals, sending updates back to command in case clear, brief style that she had drilled into him over 8 months of night shifts. On the morning of the 3rd day, a resupply unit finally broke through to them. The commander of the resupply unit, a young Foran officer, looked at the state of the corridor and then at the small group of humans standing in the middle of it, dirty and tired and still at their posts. He asked Glenn, through a translator, how they had held for 3 days with that much damage. Glenn looked at the corridor. Then at his people. "We just didn't stop," he said. The Foran officer translated this back to his own crew. There was a long pause. Then, one by one, the Foran soldiers pressed their hands flat against their chests. Glenn did not know what it meant. But it felt like something good. He sat down on a piece of broken equipment, finally, and let someone look at his arm. The Varek did not retreat all at once. It happened slowly. Like watching a tide pull back from a shore. First the pressure on the front line eased. Then the signals from the outer positions changed, less movement, less noise, longer gaps between contact. The Joint Fleet commanders noticed it before anyone said it out loud. They watched their displays carefully, not trusting it at first, waiting for the next strike that did not come. Ida noticed it from her command ship on a quiet morning when the battle reports had been still for 6 hours. She did not celebrate. She did not make an announcement. She poured herself a cup of water, sat in her chair, and kept watching the display. She had learned a long time ago that the moment you assumed something was over was often the moment it surprised you, but the hours passed. Then a full day. Then 2. The Varek were pulling back, not retreating in disorder, not running. They moved back the same way they had moved forward. Steadily. Without rushing. As if they had made a decision somewhere, in whatever way the Varek made decisions, and were simply carrying it out. They did not leave their damaged ships behind. They collected them. They did not leave anything that could be studied or learned from. They went back into the dark between stars and disappeared. The communication lines across the council station lit up all at once. Delegates calling each other. Generals calling their fleets. Stations calling the council chair. Everyone speaking at the same time, the way people speak when something enormous has just happened and nobody is quite sure yet how to hold it. Ida sent a single message to Alan at the council station. It said, "They are gone. For now." Start talking to them before they forget what just happened. Alan read it, folded the paper, put it in his jacket pocket, and went to request an emergency session. The chamber was full again. It looked the same as it had during the worst days of the crisis, every seat taken, every delegate present. But the feeling in the room was completely different. The tight, fearful air was gone. In its place was something harder to name. Not quite joy. Not quite relief. Something quieter than both. The kind of feeling a room has when people have come through something together and are only just beginning to understand what it cost. The council chair, Old Ven, opened the session without his usual formal words. He simply stood at the front of the chamber and said that the Varek had withdrawn from all known council space, that the joint fleet was standing down from full alert, and that the council owed a debt to every world and every soldier that had fought. Then he paused. He looked across the chamber. Past the front rows where the great powers sat. Past the middle rows where the smaller worlds were placed. All the way to the far corner. Row 47. Behind the wide stone pillar. Alan was sitting there exactly as he always sat. Jacket neat. Notes on the wobbly desk. Cup of cold tea that he had forgotten about again. Ven spoke directly to him. The delegate from Earth, he said, and this time his voice carried something it had not carried the first time he had said those words. Wait. Genuine wait. The chamber turned. All of it. 400 planets worth of eyes moving to that corner, to that pillar, to the quiet man sitting behind it. Ven continued. This council has kept a list for many years. A ranking of worlds. Their strength, their power, their place in the order of things. He paused. Earth was ranked last on that list. I would like to say, before this full chamber, that the list was wrong. Nobody laughed this time. Nobody made any sound at all. This council would like to offer the delegate from Earth a permanent seat. Not in row 47. Not behind a pillar. Ven gestured toward the front of the chamber, toward the wide curved desk at the very center of the floor where the most senior council members sat. The first seat. At the head of this table. The chamber was completely silent. Alan sat still for a moment. Then he gathered his notes slowly, the way he always did. He stood up. He stepped out from behind the pillar. He walked down through the rows, past row 40, past row 30, past the middle of the chamber where the smaller world sat, some of whom gave small nods as he passed. He reached the front of the chamber and stood before the head of the great curved desk. He looked at the seat for a moment. A large, well-made seat, nothing like the small uncomfortable one in row 47. Then he smiled. A small, quiet smile. He shook his head gently. The chamber stirred. A low murmur of surprise. Alan turned to face the full room. When he spoke clearly and without rushing, the same way he had spoken the first time he stood at this podium with the whole chamber laughing at him. Earth is grateful, he said. Deeply grateful. For this offer and for what it means. He paused. But I would like to go back to my seat. The murmur grew a little. Earth did not come to this war to earn a better chair, he said. We did not fight so that our name would move up a list. We fought because there were people in danger. All of you. Every world in this room. And that was reason enough. He looked around the chamber slowly. If Earth sits at the head of this table, then Earth is above something. We do not want to be above anything. We want to be in the room. With everyone. The same as before. He looked at Ven. If it is all right with the chair, I will keep my seat in row 47. Ven looked at him for a long moment. The old creature's face was difficult to read. Then he did something that those who were present would describe differently depending on who was telling the story. Some said he smiled, some said he simply bowed his head, some said he did both. The seat in row 47, Ven said quietly, will never be given to anyone else. Alan nodded once. He turned and walked back through the chamber. Back through the rows. Back to the corner. Back behind the wide stone pillar. He sat down. The desk wobbled when he rested his arm on it. He picked up his cold tea and finally drank it. The news reached Earth in pieces, the way news always did. Glenn heard it at the listening post, through his own equipment, picking up the Council's open broadcast. He sat at his station with his headset on and listened to the whole thing. When it was finished he sat quietly for a while. Then he wrote up a clean report, out of habit, even though there was nothing left to report. Kay read it at her desk. She set it down. She looked out the small porthole window at the stars for a long time. "Good," she said, to no one in particular. Then she went back to work. On Earth, on a flat piece of land where the sky at night was very wide and very clear, Rosa pulled her old wooden chair out to the edge of the field as she always did. She wrapped her blanket around her shoulders. She looked up. She did not know about the council chamber. She did not know about Row 47, or Ida's maps, or Glenn holding a burning corridor for 3 days, or Dot running across open ground 4 times without being asked. She just knew that the night felt the same as it always had. Wide and quiet and full of stars. Her grandfather had told her once that the sky was the one thing nobody could fence off or take away. She thought he was right. She stayed until the cold drove her inside. There was work to do in the morning. There was always work to do.